Northwest Passage across the top of North America has been called the Holy Grail of sailing. In 2009, our speaker, Russ Roberts, joined Eric Forsyth aboard a small sailboat called Fiona in an attempt to retrace the route of early Arctic explorers. Captain Russ Roberts is an airline pilot, former radio broadcaster, and sails whenever he can. Russ had a pilot's license before he could drive. At the age of 17, he was the youngest flight instructor in the country. At one point back when he said he was young and thought he was immortal, as we all thought that when we were young, right? He got a job delivering single-engine airplanes to Europe by flying them across the North Atlantic. He said he is not an adventurer, but just a regular guy who sometimes shows up to do things. Having already absorbed the stories of Horatio Hornblower and Thor Heyerdahl, when he was about 12, his grandparents sent him down to a pond and told him to learn to sail. Russ has been in love with boats and ships ever since. After reading all of Patrick O'Brien's books, he signed on to sail HMS Surprise, the square-rigged ship that figured in the movie Master and Commander. It was there, standing on a single line, 100 feet above the deck of a swaying ship, that Russ said he experienced leg-shaking fear, I guess, especially if you're afraid of heights. When he is not traveling somewhere, Russ divides his time between a home in Virginia and Seaside, Oregon, where he helps Jeannie with the Gilbert Inn. Please welcome Captain Russ Roberts.
The writer Stephen King said to start with action and explain it later. He said you hook your audience that way. So I hope you're wondering how those guys got into that fix. We'll get to that part of the story later. King also said to never tell a story that you would not want to hear yourself. So for this hour, you'll hear my kind of tale, which is a sea story. Thank you, Betsy Ellerbrook, for the introduction. I appreciate you and the museum giving us time for this slideshow. If this is your first visit to the Columbia River Maritime Museum, I encourage you to take the time to really get to know it. This area is rich in nautical history. Indeed, quiet history is made each time one of the Columbia River bar pilots cons a ship to or from the sea, or the Coast Guard from Station Cape D, or the cutter Steadfast goes out on another call. Fishing, marine research, the nautical history of this area from the time of the Age of Exploration, it's all here on and near this beautiful Columbia River. And the museum's successful mission is to make sure that we never lose our nautical heritage. Well, for a while I have been shopping for a boat. I found that shopping for a boat is a lot cheaper than actually owning one. In 2009, I Googled sea-going sailboats, and Captain Eric Forsyth's blog popped up. Eric was planning a trip to circumnavigate North America that would hinge on a successful ride through the Northwest Passage over the top of the continent. Forsyth requires a crew for his many wanderings aboard what he calls the yacht Fiona, a West Sail 42 yacht in the most basic sense. In no way must the yacht Fiona conjure an image of luxury travel. After chatting with Eric for about 5 minutes, he asked, "Well, Russ, are you coming with us?" I am used to a bit more bureaucracy. I anticipated a bit of a vetting process. His question did take me a little off guard. Without thinking about it, I answered, "Sure, Eric, I can give you 2 months." So a few weeks later, I was on my way to Greenland to meet up with Fiona. When I looked at a globe, I was pretty impressed with where I was going. That's way up there. I'd been there in airplanes that far north, but never in a 5-mile-per-hour sailboat. So I thought I'd refresh myself on the area. The native people at the top of the world are the Inuit. Now, native words for indigenous groups quite often mean the people, and such it is what the people of the North. They settled the area from Siberia to Greenland about 1,000 years ago. For 500 years, European colonial powers, mainly the British, sent explorers in an attempt to discover a commercial sea route to trade partners in Asia, north and west around North America. Today, we find explorers' names peppering our map. Hudson's Bay, Davis Strait, Baffin Island, Mackenzie River. Each trip of exploration brought back new information to fill in the blanks. Each trip added to a more accurate map and brought back knowledge of how difficult a task of transiting by way of a Northwest Passage would be. Indeed, it remained to be seen if it would be possible at all. For a while, the most promising hope for success lay with the talents and experience of this man, Captain Sir John Franklin. By the way, America's astronauts could not pose this way. The fingers must face forward. Michael Collins wrote about an early NASA memo he received that said, holding your hands on your hips like Sir John here makes men look like sissies. Not an image NASA desired. Was Sir John a sissy? No, this man typified the British heart of oak. On his first overland expedition to the Arctic in 1820, Franklin became known as the man who ate his shoes. Running out of regular food, he and his crew chose to dine upon their footgear. Apparently, Captain Franklin developed a taste for Florsheim because he was eager to make the trip 2 more times. By the time he was finished, Sir John had mapped 3,000 miles of Arctic coastline. His third expedition, his last trip, is the one that concerns us most. Using 2 veteran ships of previous Arctic and Antarctic expeditions with the wonderful names of Erebus and Terror, Franklin, 59 years old, set off in 1845. After encountering whaling ships in Baffin Bay, he entered the Canadian archipelago and, as news stories of the day put it, was lost without a trace. Franklin's entire crew and hundreds more died over the centuries, and yet the Northwest Passage remained but a dream. Given time, though, dreams often become reality. We jump ahead to the end of the 19th century. In Norway, a young man named Roald Amundsen is reading everything he can about Arctic explorers. His mother insists Roald will become a physician. But when she dies, Amundsen, now 21 years old, is free to pursue his dream of continuing the quest for the Northwest Passage. Over the next decade, he learned the sailing trade. He secured funding. He spent every kroner on purchasing and fitting out a wooden 70 feet long former herring boat named Joa. In 1903, just ahead of his creditors, Amundsen and his crew of 6 left Norway, headed for the Canadian Arctic. In addition to sails, Joa was equipped with a 13-horsepower engine. Without an engine, as we found on our own trip aboard Fiona, his trip would have been a failure. So, up the west coast of Greenland, down Lancaster Sound, down Peel Sound, Joa carved a route that would be followed by our own Fiona 105 years later. Amundsen spent 2 winters in the harbor he called Joa Haven. Amundsen spent his time there learning from the Inuit who had gathered around. Formerly nomadic people, or semi-nomadic at least, these Inuit never left. Joa Haven became a permanent village. Roald learned that small groups in the Arctic survive best where game is widely dispersed. He learned that dogs make the best engines for sleds. He kept his men in line. There are places in his book where he wrote about the difficulty of keeping his men on the straight and narrow, the need for purity and chastity, you understand. He wrote about his personal piety. We can almost hear his mother speaking to him. "What's this, Roald? Rumors of a girlfriend?" We met Amundsen's Inuit grandson in Joa Haven. Finally, in August 1905, Joa left Joa Haven. A few days later, a crew member sang out, "Vessel in sight, sir." Rushing on deck, Amundsen saw a ship coming toward them from the west, the whaler Charles Hanson, Captain James McKenna, out of San Francisco. With that meeting, Amundsen knew the Northwest Passage was complete. Amundsen had done it. He writes, "My dream from childhood, this very moment, it was fulfilled." I suppose it was weakness on my part, but I could feel tears in my eyes. A few years later, Amundsen, using the knowledge gained in the Arctic, would be the first man to the South Pole. So, why did I want to go up and try to sail the Northwest Passage? I have no idea. There is my interest in the history, the challenge of the ice, but we often clothe our unknown motivations with exterior explanations, mere rationalizations that may mask unspoken inner impulses. The best thing I've come up with is this bit from the Greek poet Lucian of Samothrace. He wrote, "The occasion that moved me to take such a voyage in hand was only a curiosity of mind, a desire of novelties, and a longing to learn out the bounds of the ocean." Well, I've already mentioned Eric's rather casual crew selection method. I, however, did desire to do a bit of vetting. Did this guy have what it takes to take on the infamous waters of the Northwest Passage? Well, Eric had been awarded the Cruising Club of America's Blue Water Medal. That was a good start. But the things I highlight here in blue are what really got my attention. He had gone to Pitcairn Island, around Cape Horn at least twice, to Antarctica twice. He took Fiona around the world not once but several times. This represents experience. But there is a downside. The only way to get this kind of experience is by spending many years on the water. In Eric's case, he accrued those sea miles on vacations away from his career building supercolliders and superconductors at the Brookhaven National Laboratory. This means that by the time he'd amassed this resume, Eric had gotten old. But was he too old? Well, having a desire to quantify everything, it's kind of an airline pilot thing, I wanted a chart. So I made one. I hope to find Eric in here, and I hope to be in that area myself. Now, you may notice that the experience line is not linear, and that's because we start to have the same experiences over and over again as we get older, and thus producing a diminishing return. Now, I do notice a couple of pencils moving. I wish you would not write this one down. It's just more rationalization to justify my decision to sail with the 77-year-old Eric. This age creep chart is worthless. I should have created an eccentric behavior chart instead. Well now, are you ready to come with us? Here are my planned travels on Fiona. I would leave Nook to a point 900 miles from the North Pole. We would turn west down Lancaster Sound to Resolute, down Peel Sound, Franklin Straits to Joa Haven. We would turn west again to Cambridge Bay. Continuing on, we would pass Tuktoyaktuk, Point Barrow, making a left turn and approach Nome through the Bering Strait. I would travel as far as I could toward Nome before my time ran out. I arrived in Greenland in the middle of July when the fringe of the island was actually green. Casting my lot with Forsyth, I joined Fiona in the town of Nook. Ranging in age from 24 to 77 years old, we would be a crew of 4. It would be the skipper, Eric, Joey, Ed, and me. Now, a couple of hours before I came in from the airport, Eric fell 10 feet down into the hold of a big wooden boat that Fiona was rafted to or tied to. He had cracked, maybe even broken, a rib right off the bat. Here we go, a 77-year-old skipper with a possible broken rib. I hope this was no ill omen. But Eric did not let this stop him. No delay, no doctor either. Forsyth is another Englishman with a heart of oak. I finally got to the boat. I'd been on board just a few minutes. Instead of going for an x-ray, Eric and Joey went to town for lunch. I went below to stow my gear. Ed on deck called out, "Russ, you better get up here." Ed's from Long Island. Our neighboring vessel's young crew had cast us adrift. I don't know where their captain was, but they'd thrown our lines off, pushed us into the harbor, and motored themselves away. We were drifting down the crowded harbor full of boats. I said to Ed, I think you better start the engine, Ed. "Oh, I don't want these guys thinking I can start the engine without Eric being here." I asked, why not, Ed? I thought that was a pretty weird answer. At this point, I didn't know where anything was on the boat, much less the starter switch or the key. But with the help of a couple of guys in an inflatable boat and some dicey fending off, we did manage to get Fiona tied up again about 500 feet from where we'd started. We never told Eric about this. He obviously knew we had moved the boat. We just didn't tell him how we'd moved, figuring a cracked rib was enough for one day. The morning we departed Nook, Ed left us. For days he'd been sleepless with worry about the fog, freighters, and the general discomfort suffered on Fiona on its ride up from New York. Although Ed had quit his job to join Eric for his entire one-year circumnavigation of North America, Ed decided to head home. That left us with a crew of 3. Man, what is with the cheddar cheese and peanut butter? Eric was on a tight budget. He had no sponsors and asked that we, his crew, contribute no money to this endeavor either. He said he financed the whole trip with his Social Security checks. Thus, saltines with peanut butter and cheddar cheese, 4 pieces each. Each afternoon at 5, Eric made hors d'oeuvres and Fiona cocktails. Now, here's one you may choose to write down. A splash of rum, a bit of apple juice with a squeeze of lime, the Fiona cocktail. Need I tell you that happy hour was not always a cheery event? Now here's a schematic of the Fiona, the front of the boat, the bow. You go through the head, the bathroom, as you work your way aft. The main saloon, the main cabin, these are the berths where Joey and I slept. Here is the dining room table. Across from that, the galley. Then a passageway through the radio room with some other equipment stowed in there. Through another door back into the master's cabin. This is where Eric slept. Through another door to the second head or bathroom and into the engine room. We are now 2 days out. I'm on watch at 7 o'clock in the morning. Eric and Joey are asleep. I hear a loud bell going off. Ducking below, I find the cabin filled with smoke. Thick blue smoke. I fly back to Eric's cabin, which is right next to the engine room and the ringing bell, and wake him. Eric jumps up